My path to working at Hewlett and in education, really like a mix of personal and professional experiences. On the personal side, I grew up in a house of educators. My mom was a teacher, an elementary teacher her whole career. My dad was a teacher and administrator for his career. And so I really got a sense of behind the scenes, like what it takes to be an educator and how much they gave to their students and to their schools. And personally, I was drawn more to the research side of things. And so my career has focused on figuring out how to create meaningful, inclusive, engaging environments where students are really excited and motivated to learn.
Angela, for those that aren't familiar with open education resources, can you provide a little bit of background about how Hewlett Foundation defines those and maybe give a few examples?
Sure. So open educational resources are educational materials that are free for teachers and students to use, to customize and share. And the open licensing, educators don't have to worry about traditional copyright. So it's easier for them to personalize lessons or even whole books and engage students in content that's more current and more relevant. And by relevant, I mean in terms of customizing for students' local language or their interests or their lived experiences. In our work at Hewlett, we're focused not just on creating or supporting the creation of open educational resources, but really more broadly around what we call open education. And that's been an intentional shift for us and in the field, actually, because what we want to do is recognize that it's not just materials that matter when it comes to teaching and learning. It's really about those relationships and interactions in the classroom between teachers and students and among students. And so we wanted to pay greater attention to pedagogy and practice in terms of meaning making and learning, and making sure educators are supported in teaching in this kind of way. And the frame around open education also is about recognizing that policies matter. So policies around not just what learning for students, but also learning for educators, policies around how there are opportunities for families and communities to engage and have a voice in shaping what learning looks like in their schools, and also research. And we want to look at like research and what's working and not working around when open educational resources and practices are being used in schools. So we're really thinking about this broader frame of open education, thinking about this work more holistically in addressing what learning and teaching look like in classrooms.
Angela, maybe just to hear a little bit more, you've talked about Hewlett Foundation support. Maybe to underscore that a little bit in the types of organizations that you supported, that the Hewlett Foundation has supported in the OER space, would be great to share with our viewers.
Yeah. So our work really in open education really focuses on three areas. We partner with educators who are developing and using OER with and for students. And in that space, those are partnerships with K-12 educators who are creating core content around math, English language arts, science. In the post-secondary space, the focus has been partnerships with organizations that are creating content for high enrollment introductory college courses. And we prioritize working with teams who are not just focused on creating the content, but again, thinking about how they can partner with educators to create more equitable and inclusive learning environments. And we also think about research as part of this because we want to understand how it's going for teachers when they're trying out these approaches. And also we want to make sure that the developers are getting feedback about what's working and not working too. So that's one area. A second area of focus for us is partnerships with school and system leaders and education systems. And this area of work is really about supporting the enabling conditions for effective use of OER. So we work with these educators at the leadership level to develop policies that support OER adoption and creation, and to help create space in schools to support educator learning and development about open educational resources and practices, and really build out sustainable communities of practice. And so then the third area is what we call field building. And that's around field building to support a diverse and inclusive open education field. So in this area, we're trying to find ways to share and amplify different perspectives on open education, and particularly wanting to understand how open education can benefit learners and communities who've been marginalized in schools. We're also trying to figure out how to expand global access to open education. And while we can't work directly with every community around the world, we're able to partner with organizations that can provide technical assistance and support, for example, to countries who are interested in how to integrate OER as part of their in their education systems. And as part of our field building, again, we're thinking about research. We want to make sure we're building research capacity in the field to learn about what's happening in open education around the world.
That's great, Angela. And I know in this particular issue of the EdTech Connected and in general, organizations such as UNESCO have been in the vanguard of supporting open education resources. You've supported them. There's a blog piece by UNHCR and Learning Equality that will also be included in this EdTech Connect issue. And we're delighted to be working with Neil Butcher and Associates on some of the supporting work that you're providing support for in general for the OER policy dialogues. As our audience is principally international but developing country focused, are there any other organizations that you want to give a shout out to that you guys have supported that are working in the OER space, that are doing work in, let's say, low resource developing country context? I've mentioned a few, just any others that come to mind?
I'd highlight OER Africa, and Neil Butcher is involved with that organization as well, but they've been doing really thoughtful work in supporting educators in learning about OER and in building capacity in countries in the African context. And then there's also Commonwealth of Learning, who's been a good partner for us. They work with the Commonwealth countries, but in very responsive ways, listening to educators and their interests and needs, and supporting learning about open educational resources as part of the work that they do.
So you've talked about a variety of different areas of input and strategic collaborators in terms of OERs. You have policymakers in countries, you have administrators, you have teachers, communities, students, learners in general. What do you see as some promising areas to expand OER adoption globally? Maybe pick one of those client groups, or in general, just an area of focus, just in terms of expanding the reach and impact of OERs.
Yeah, when I think about this question, I actually think the UNESCO OER recommendation provides helpful framing around this. That recommendation talks about 5 areas that are important for advancing OER. It talks about building capacity for the creation and use of OER, developing supportive policy, encouraging inclusive and equitable access to quality OER, nurturing sustainable models for OER development, and also international cooperation. And in my experience these past several years at Hewlett, it seems like policy has gotten a lot of attention, but I really believe coordinating across these areas, it's what's most important for OER to be successful and sustainable. If we think about, and we want OER to be a tool that advances and improves teaching and learning, it needs to be responsive to the interests and perspectives of learners, and particularly those who've been marginalized in schools. And we need educators who are prepared, who have the capacity to find and create effective open educational resources and practices. And then with sustainability, that's something that needs to be addressed from the very beginning, not only in terms of business models for developers, but also in terms of building community and sustaining the community's capacity to evolve and improve OER as they're learning what works and what doesn't work in their communities and with students.
Are there any specific opportunities, examples that you see in regards to OER access for addressing issues of equity, maybe racial equity, and again, sort of marginalized populations? Anything specific you want to highlight or describe in that context?
Yeah, yes, I'm glad we have the opportunity to talk about this, because this has been an area of work that's priority for us now at the foundation and with our partners. And so the way I think about it, the vision of open education has always been about equity. But we're beginning to think about more expansive notions of equity beyond access to textbooks and materials, but thinking about equity in terms of attention to race and culture and identity in learning. And I really do see that there's potential for OER and open education to play an important role around this. I think about it in terms of resources and making sure that materials are culturally responsive. Again, that they're inviting and engaging different perspectives and students' lived experiences, and supporting learners in appreciating and sustaining their cultural experiences and practices. And I think about the work that we're doing around open educational practices and preparing educators. And I think that could be expanded beyond just finding and using OER to really thinking about how to support students in engaging in these conversations about which materials are most relevant and interesting from their perspective, and preparing educators to create environments that are really affirming for learners in this way. And then I think too about like how we do this work, and that as we move in this deeper direction around work on equity and racial equity, that the design and research of materials and practices really need to happen in partnership with communities, in partnership with Black and Indigenous educators and students and scholars. So the work isn't about translating ideas from one context to another, but really like learning in place and in partnership with each other. So I'm encouraged because I think there's a growing interest around this in the field, and hopefully we're going to see greater progress and deeper work around this in the years to come.
Well, this has just been great to get your perspective and also the Hewlett Foundation to underscore how important the role of the Hewlett Foundation has been for supporting a variety of initiatives in this space. So thank you for your leadership and for Hewlett Foundation.
It was great to have this opportunity to chat with you and to share a little bit about some of the work that we're doing and some of our partners' work, of course, and looking forward to learning more with your community as well.
Thanks, Angela. I really appreciate it.